Hello, I'm Judge Douglas Ginsburg, and our guest today at the GAI Forum at the Global Antitrust Institute in Scalia Law School is Professor Thibault Schrepel from the University of Utrecht, also associated with the Berkman Center for the Internet and Society at Harvard University. And our topic today is what every antitrust lawyer should know about blockchain. Most of us in the antitrust community are encountering this phenomenon more and more frequently, often in the writings of Professor Schrepel. And it's time that we become familiar with it and why it's relevant to antitrust. When I started out in this field, it was necessary to learn some economics. 20 years ago, it became necessary to learn some intellectual property. Now I'm afraid it's time for us to learn more about blockchain. And this is a great opportunity to do it because Professor Schrepel is such an expert in the field and in its relation to antitrust. So I'm going to begin very simply by welcoming you, Professor Schrepel, and asking you to explain just first, what is a blockchain?
Sure. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. I'm very excited about the conversation. And actually, I do have a few questions for you as well. I know we haven't discussed that before, but it was my little surprise for you. So maybe I will just try to answer your question, and then right away, if I can ask you one question, I will be pleased if I could do that. So of course, so it's a new field, it's a new technology. So everything I'm about to say could be debated and argued against or for. But so blockchain, when generally speaking, we talk about a blockchain, we actually talk about different layers. And those different layers all coming together are what we discuss as being a blockchain. Now, some people might say that only one of those layers is the actual blockchain and the rest is a bunch of softwares running on top of it, but I won't get into that distinction. The very, very basic idea of a blockchain is that if you want to picture something, it's an Excel sheet and a bunch of participants may have access to that Excel sheet. And every time there is a new piece of information being put there, all of the participants can actually see that information being entered into the Excel sheet. So far, no difference in what I've been saying between a blockchain and a proper Excel sheet that you could share online. But the number one difference is that on the blockchain, once you put the information there, it is virtually impossible to get rid of that information. And for that very precise reason, we want to make sure before the information is put on the blockchain that we want that information there. And there are different mechanisms to check whether or not we want the information, which is called the consensus of the blockchain. But again, the very basic idea is that it's an Excel sheet and that you could use to record any sort of information that you want.
So what would be the most common or readily understandable sort of use to which the blockchain would be put?
There is a distinction that I quite like that was introduced by an author called Melanie Swan, now 5 years ago already. And she makes a distinction between 3 different types of uses of blockchain. The first one is cryptocurrency, and that makes sense that it is the first one because indeed blockchain and Bitcoin were introduced at the same time in the same paper, which is only 9 pages long that you could find on the internet easily. And so cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin being one of them, is the first application. But Bitcoin is not blockchain. It is just one way of using blockchain. The second one is what is called smart contracts. So smart contracts, the joke is to say it's not smart, it's not a contract. Well, actually, it could be kind of smart, a kind of a contract. The idea is fairly simple. It's a transaction that is set to happen in the future if and when certain conditions are met. So for instance, I could say if it is raining tomorrow in Virginia, then automatically you will receive 1 Bitcoin from me. And that is a smart contract. Of course, you can imagine a smart contract with hundreds of conditions for the smart contract to be actually triggered. And the third one is basically anything that you could do with a computer. Well, you could do it in a decentralized manner, and I guess we will discuss what decentralization is, but you could do it in a decentralized manner on the blockchain. And so this is called blockchain 3.0. But now, before we enter into the technology a little bit more, if I can ask you my question, because I think it's good to maybe to start there. I'm very curious to know, let's say one day you arrive at the court and you see a new pile of documents on your desk, and after a few seconds you realize it's what we could call blockchain antitrust case. So antitrust related and involves blockchain as a technology. I'm curious to know what your feeling might be. I guess it could be that you would be afraid or scared because it is indeed a technical subject. The second one, I guess, could be that you will be pretty happy because indeed everything is to be made in terms of legal ruling in the field. Or would you, maybe that's a third option, just think, well, it's just one case at hundreds, if not thousands of cases. So whatever, if it's blockchain or another one. I'm curious to know what's your reaction will be towards such cases.
Well, it's actually very reminiscent of my reaction when we had the Microsoft case in 2001 in the DC Circuit. Here was this case with a 70,000-page record, which had been digitized except for the graphics. The briefs and the record were talking about APIs and ISPs and IAPs and Java. And I think I was probably not alone on the court in being ignorant of all of those terms. And so the first thing was to sit down and become as confident and familiar with them as possible so that I could make sense of arguments that were being made about them. It was quite challenging. And in fact, within the court, we considered inviting an expert to do a little tutorial just for the judges. But of course, we wouldn't do that without apprising the parties. And immediately they all said, government and the company said, well, we have to be present for that. So, and of course, they wanted to be able to cross-examine as well. So we shelved that idea and just went back to studying the books. And I think we came to understand what we needed to understand.
All right, and I guess the same could be said for blockchain. Generally speaking, it's true that it's a very technical subject. It could become very, very technical and about the technology. But at the end of the day, for lawyers and economists and for everyone in society, if you are not involved in actually developing blockchains, then you don't need to understand everything. What you need to understand are the key characteristics and what matters in the legal field. And the same is true for the internet, I guess. No one could actually, I mean, I don't know any lawyer that could actually recreate the internet from zero. And yet we kind of understand what are the implications of, using the sharing economy apps and all that. So the same could be true for blockchain. So I know it might sound like a scary topic because it could be very technical, but at the end of the day, it is about understanding a few of those characteristics that really matters for us.
Well, that's a relief, but not a surprise. And I know that from what I've read of your own work, that there are such clear implications for antitrust, which is why we want to have this discussion when we're talking about things like smart contracts and much more complex and concerning than say algorithmic price fixing, which we've all been reading about as well. So let's forge on. We have this thing that looks conceptually like an Excel spreadsheet, and you said it's immutable once something is entered, and it can be viewed by by whom? All the participants in what?
Yes, so I think that what I'm about to say is very, very important in terms of antitrust, and it should pretty much be the basis of every analysis. There is a clear distinction between different types of blockchain, and I think it's important, again, to understand what we're talking about. First, you could make a distinction between a permissionless blockchain and a permission blockchain. The difference between the two is the ability to actually write some new information into the blockchain. If the blockchain is permissionless, it means that anyone could become the person validating the information, if the blockchain is permissioned, it means that only certain person can actually say, yes, we want that information to be put into the blockchain. So that's a very important distinction. And there is another one, which is a difference between private blockchains and public ones. If it's a public blockchain, it means that anyone can see the information on the blockchain. So you could just actually enter, for instance, the transaction identification of every Bitcoin transactions that ever happens, and you will see a bunch of information. It's the blockchain, on the contrary, is a private blockchain. It means that certain parties can actually see the information if they are granted the right to do so. And so by definition, if the blockchain is public and permissionless, anyone can see the information and actually use the blockchain to enter some new information, validate the information. If on the contrary, the blockchain is private and permissioned, it means that only certain members could actually see the information and use the blockchain, and that could be changed anytime. So of course that should trigger refusal to deal and essential facility and all of those concepts that we hear about all the time, that they make sense in the context of private blockchain, which also I think makes sense if you want to create a cartel. Maybe you want to create a cartel in a place where it will be more complicated for competition agencies and courts to enter. And on the contrary, public permissionless blockchain, anyone can see the information. So it means that by nature, the information is public, which also is very important for us antitrust. And anyone can use the blockchain. So again, that distinction between those different types of blockchain, I think, is key in understanding the antitrust implications of each case.
Twice you referred, when explaining something about the blockchain, referred to Bitcoins, but I want to make sure that I'm correct in thinking that Bitcoins needn't be a part of any particular blockchain or transaction. We see here in the US advertisements, I think it's for IBM, saying the blockchain can be used to trace produce from the field where it's harvested to the store where it's sold, and that provides greater security for health purposes and recalls and so on. So they're talking about tomatoes, not Bitcoins.
Yeah, and I was amazed to see last week, actually, so at the very beginning of May, that the World Economic Forum said that maybe blockchain should be used to restart the economy post-COVID-19, to create trust, because indeed you could use blockchain to see where the product has been through and to control the entire chain. But this is where we use words in a way that maybe is not exactly very correct or precise. Some people, as I said at the very beginning, would say that all of the layers are what we call the blockchain. And some people would say, well, actually, this is not correct. Only the database, the Excel sheet, should be called the blockchain. And so if I take Bitcoin as an example, it's a bit confusing because it happens that the database and the software that is running on top of that database, through which you need to go through if you want to put some more information, is also called Bitcoin. And the only application that you can actually plug on top of the software is the Bitcoin application, which is the cryptocurrency. So it means in turn that for certain blockchain, as the Bitcoin blockchain, you can only do one thing, which is the thing it was designed for, which in the case of Bitcoin is cryptocurrency. So there is no way, for now at least, for you to use the Bitcoin blockchain to actually track products and do what you were mentioning. Some other blockchains are saying, well, you could actually use my blockchain to do anything you want. So there, if you want, you could actually plug any software that will indeed track products and to verify where the product is coming from. But you could also develop the alternative to Uber or Airbnb if you want. So here again, you can make another distinction between some blockchains that could be used for only one thing and some other blockchains which are more of a platform in the sense of antitrust that you could use indeed to plug any software that you want.
Right, so you gave us a hint of one use of a blockchain that would be of concern, antitrust matter, and that is for collusion. So presumably it would be a permissioned blockchain where only the cartel members could access it. And They would be able there to fix a price and record transactions that, I guess, confirm to the other members of the cartel that each of us is adhering to the price agreement. That sort of seems like just a meeting in a motel room abstracted to a meeting on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes. So here again, I keep on making distinctions, but I think it's important to try to create a framework. You can make a distinction between two different types of collusion. When we say collusion on blockchain, what do we mean exactly? Well, first, it could mean that you are discussing a collusion about the blockchain, so about the actual functioning of the blockchain. So a few person on the blockchain could collude, for instance, to change the rules of that blockchain. So this is a very technical field. This is surprisingly enough where we see a few litigations going on. And you could also, which is the second types of use, you could indeed use the blockchain to collude and to create an effect in the real world. So this is what you mentioned. Indeed, you could use the blockchain, whether you want to use smart contract or not, to actually collude and say, well, we want to collude and agree on fixing prices in our supermarkets. So let's use a blockchain. If you try to do that, I think indeed, chances are that those participants will use a private blockchain, meaning that antitrust agencies and courts and competitors could not actually enter the blockchain and see that something's going on. But also potentially you could use a public blockchain because it's so public, it might be really, really obvious that if you use a public blockchain, you won't do anything illegal onto those public blockchains. So maybe it could be a kind of a trick if you want to do something illegal. But so again, distinction between those two types of collusion, I think, is important.
You made reference to changing the rules of the blockchain. And how can that be done? The entries in the chain, you say, of the ledger are immutable. They cannot be changed. But the rules of the game can be changed?
Yes. So there again, this is where the importance of the distinction between public and private blockchains. Indeed, the information, and this is true for public blockchain, to some degree for private blockchain, but let's keep on with this idea in mind that indeed, once the information is there, you cannot get rid of the information. However, what you could do is change the rules for someone to enter some new piece of information on the blockchain. And that, it depends, public or private blockchain. If we're talking about a private blockchain, if you are the gatekeeper of the blockchain, the one who designed the blockchain, there you could probably change the rules anytime you want without the approval of anyone. So again, you could imagine all of the anti-competitive practices that you could actually embed in those modifications. If it's a public blockchain, if you want to change the rules, then you need to have the approval of more than 51% of all of the participants. And very practically, what it means is that you will actually submit a vote. You would say, do we all agree that we change the rules? So we don't actually, we enter information in a different way, for instance. And if at least 51% says, yes, we want to do it, it means that those people need to plug the software they use to connect into the blockchain to the new version of the blockchain, which is using new rules. But what you create is actually a new version of the same blockchain. But again, it means that you cannot get rid of the past information. Those information were entered at the time using some rules that were valid at the time, therefore they will stay there forever. All you could do is write something else after that information.
So it sounds like there's an initial set of rules, which is something like a constitution, and then changes can be made with some procedure that has been specified in the original rules. So does it have to be 50% plus one, or can it be from the outset, these rules could not be changed except by a 2/3 majority?
Yes, it could. So I guess here, which probably will be shocking to some people in the blockchain community, but you could make a parallel between a state and a public blockchain, in a sense that indeed, if only, let's say, 20% of the participants of one blockchain wants to change the rule, there is actually a way for them to do that, which is to create what is called a fork, which is basically to duplicate the entire blockchain, all of the data, and to create a new version of it with the new rules. And that could happen, of course, if you are the only one using then the new version of your blockchain. There is no value and no reason why you would do that. But let's say 30% of the Ethereum community right now, or which is a blockchain, or the Bitcoin blockchain, that will be big enough to actually create a sustainable version of the blockchain. So that's 30%. If you have 51%, then it means that your blockchain will change the rules and everyone will kind of agree. But indeed, it could be that if you design the blockchain, you set up certain criteria for the rules to be changed. You could say not only 51%, but we also want those users to agree with the changes. And this is something which, generally speaking, for now, because the field is quite young, when we discuss blockchains, we have those rules, and pretty much all of the public blockchain, they use the rules that I've been describing, which is 51%, nothing else. But indeed, why not creating a blockchain with totally different rules and saying actually just one person could change the rules of that blockchain? That is possible. Then the question is, if you create such a blockchain where, for instance, only one person could change the rule, can you actually convince anyone that it will be good for them to use your blockchain, knowing that anytime you may actually change the rules? And why would they use a blockchain instead of just using a regular database, if indeed those characteristics of being immutable and majority rules disappear? So this is more of the business side, but pretty much everything that I would say today, indeed, you could design the blockchain in another way and that will work. All you need to do is just to put it on the internet and hope for the best.
So tell me a little bit more about, and our viewers, a little bit more about smart contracts. I think this concept predates the blockchain, or at least is independent of the blockchain, but it seems more interesting, frankly, in the context of using a blockchain.
Yeah, so indeed, there is actually a good paper which is called, I think, the Bitcoin Pedigree. And in this paper, there are 2 or 3 authors, if I remember correctly, and they are analyzing all of the technology that are being combined into blockchain, what now we call blockchain. So blockchain is not, it's new in a sense that the combination of all of those technologies is new, but pretty much everything pre-existed the actual blockchain, whatever that is. And indeed, smart contract is one of those technologies that existed before the blockchain. So smart contract, as I said, it's a transaction for the future. So in a sense, you could say that with a smart contract, you could organize the future. Now, I've been saying that to some philosophy professors who told me that organizing the future doesn't mean anything, so we should not say that. So maybe I should not say that. But still, I think it's pretty much telling. Indeed, you say, if that and that happens in the real world, then I want automatically the smart contract to be triggered. And so here you enter kind of the field where it's about the technique a little bit, but also understanding what's the impact of the technique and the technology in the real world. And indeed, if you use a blockchain for collusion, for instance, in the real space, if your collusion is successful, that will be shown. The price of your product in your supermarket will go up. And so antitrust agencies and courts could actually start there and then enter your blockchain. And the same is true for smart contracts. The interaction between smart contracts and the real world is actually fascinating. And this is not only about the technology. So let me give you an example. If I go back to the example I gave you, if it's raining tomorrow in Virginia, I will give you 1 Bitcoin. How do we know that it is indeed raining the day after? Who can actually enter the information, indeed it was raining that day? If I'm the one in charge of putting the information, you could be sure it will be sunny tomorrow in Virginia, no matter what happens, right? Because I don't want that smart contract to be triggered. And the technology to actually register the information, to put the information from the real space into the blockchain is called an oracle. And the oracle is something, an algorithm that will try to find the information somewhere that you could trust. But of course, then you go back to that issue, can we trust the intermediary or the person giving the information as a source? So this is where not only when you talk about the decentralization of blockchain, you will see a limit, because if in the end, one oracle could actually trigger smart contract or not, this is not really decentralized. And this is where you see that all of the issues that we have in the real space eventually will re-enter the field of blockchain one way or the other. So of course, the community is working on that. There are some solutions to solve what is called the oracle problem. But still, this is one of the major issues that is being discussed right now.
So I can see how that we have the analog in the real world, as we're calling it. What you described as an insurance contract, basically. I mean, why would I be concerned about rain in Virginia? Well, maybe if I'm a farmer and I have to bring in a crop, I'm concerned about what the weather will be during a relevant period. So right now we might write that contract and agree on some authority that would determine whether the rain was, whether it rained, or if we moved away from that kind of insurance, some other matter, or if it were a commercial contract, it might just in the real world reference LIBOR or the treasury rate or the prime rate or something like that, which would determine the events that are going to occur. So if my contract says 3 years from now, the rate gets readjusted based on so many basis points above the prime rate for treasury debt, that just would happen because we would look in the newspaper and on the right date and get that information. So it sounds like in that respect, the smart contract isn't adding anything. It's just automating something that we're all used to.
In a sense, yes. Eventually, using a smart contract could actually come down to just drafting something in a contract where you know that you could actually enforce the contract if you go before court, for instance. But where smart contract might be new in a sense is that it creates trust, but also at the same time it creates distrust in the technology. So for instance, if you know that the smart contract is implemented into the blockchain, it is there, remember that any piece of information on the blockchain cannot be deleted. It means that the smart contract will be there, and there is no way you can actually get rid of that smart contract. And if you manage to solve the issue of the oracle by, for instance, linking the smart contract to a source you could trust, then it means that forever, if you forgot, for instance, to put a term into your smart contract, the smart contract will keep on operating. So every time it's going to be raining, I'm going to have to send you 1 Bitcoin, which means that I'm going to be very poor very soon. But in a sense, it creates trust because you know that if it is there, then it will happen. And it creates distrust because what if you decide to change your mind? What if even the two parties of the smart contract say, yes, let's get rid of that smart contract. There is no reason for us to use the smart contract anymore. And so this is where it gets a bit complicated. I've heard part of the blockchain community saying, well, with blockchain, it's wonderful. We can actually get rid of lawyers, practicing lawyers, because why would you hire a lawyer if you could actually just design a smart contract? To some degree, it is true that indeed the operation will be executed in time. At the same time, if you designed your smart contract poorly and you forgot to enter a clause saying that in case of non-execution, this will be the sentence or this is the term, then it's a disaster. And so all of those issues are kind of new issues. The immutability of the smart contract will create issues, which I think are issues that we'll see for the first time. If you make an analogy, it is a bit like seeing someone in the street. That person is doing something which is criminal. You can identify the person, identify the practice, and yet you cannot stop the actual practice. And this is kind of what you have with a smart contract. So those issues of immutability are creating trust. You know it will happen. And also the same idea is creating distrust in the idea that your initial willingness and intention will be there forever if you forgot to enter a term. So I agree with you. This is in the end just taking something from the real space and putting it into the blockchain. But the consequences, I think, are new. And this is one of the reasons why I think those are important issues for us to consider right now in the field of antitrust. Because if we wait, all of those characteristics of blockchain, including immutability, will be a big issue, which also could turn out to be an ally if we actually work on those issues right now, because it could create trust. And this is the difference between just talking about algorithmic collusion, where, well, first of all, where is the empirical evidence that this is something that, you know, the majority of companies are doing? And if we get the evidence, then let's just stop the practice. And I think we'll figure it out eventually, which is not necessarily true for blockchain. So this is the reason why I'm really happy to have this discussion with you right now.
So, in one of your papers, you talked, I thought it was an interesting case study about Facebook's proposed financial system, Libra. And the thing that seemed a particular interest for a competition point of view was the governance structure. And that as something that could raise maybe even new rather than just transposed competition problems. Could you describe that a bit?
Sure. So for everyone, maybe probably you've heard about the Libra project, which has been called Facebook cryptocurrency. And actually, I think it is important in that situation, in that regard, to understand the governance and how it is structured. So you do have a proposal. For now, it is not yet on the market. You have a proposal for creating a new cryptocurrency. And that new cryptocurrency will be run by an association of different companies, around 30 companies right now. And those companies, they will have the right to pretty much change the rules of that cryptocurrency anytime they want. This is a private permission blockchain. And so there, Facebook is one of those 20-something companies. And so it is true indeed that Facebook, because this is a matter of focus for most of the media, is only one of those companies involved in the governance. However, which is important and I think very interesting in that case, is that Facebook is saying, well, for the Libra association, so the association creating the rules of the blockchain, I'm just one of many, out of many. However, if you want to use Libra within the Facebook ecosystem, for instance, if you want to pay one of your friends on Facebook, if you want to buy any product on Instagram, then if you want to use Libra, you do have to have a digital wallet, which is Calibra, which is the wallet created by Facebook and controlled by Facebook. And there are fees. And so you go back to all of the issues that we have been discussing, the American Express case in the United States, and all of those issues of are the fees anti-competitive, the way they are charged. So here again, you see that in the field of private permission blockchain, the actual governance and who can do what is very important. In a sense, is a bit of analyzing what the pilot in the plane, in the cockpit can do. In a permissionless public blockchain, there is no pilot. Everyone is a pilot and you need a majority. And so for that reason, you could see how more difficult it could be to implement practices that could be sanctioned under Sherman Act Section 2, for instance. In the case of a private blockchain, it is much different. You do have a pilot or a few pilots, which is the case for the Libra project and especially Calibra. And so there, understanding the governance will be the beginning of the analysis, I think.
So the rules could be set up in any way that the original organizing companies choose. And I guess that could be structured in a way that is highly prejudicial to, or potentially prejudicial to any company that's not one of the original founders. They might have less rights.
Indeed, indeed, you could say, and maybe that would be perfectly legal actually and pro-competitive to say, if you are one of the initial investor, then you will get those, you will get to actually validate 20% of all of our transactions if you are one of the first to actually contribute to the project. And of course,
you get fees.
Exactly. If you do that, you get fees in exchange. And so maybe it will be a nice way to incentivize everyone to actually join the project. At the same time, and also what I should say, and this is something which is being raised most of the time by the part of the business which is investing in private blockchain is that in terms of privacy, it's also quite good. You could actually say, you are one user of the blockchain. I give you the right to enter the blockchain, but potentially you don't have the right tomorrow if I don't like you anymore, or if I think that you are infringing on the privacy of the other participants. Or I could say you can enter the blockchain, but you cannot see the other transactions on the blockchain, which would be the case for Libra, for instance. It will be impossible for you to see my transactions using Libra, but you could do that on the Bitcoin blockchain. On the Bitcoin blockchain, you could see all of my transactions. So in terms of privacy, this is something that we discuss quite a lot now in the field of antitrust. You can make a point that private blockchain is much better, but indeed, if you have a pilot in the plane, the pilot could go in the right direction or also in the direction which is anti-competitive, which is the risk. And I think the reason why competition agencies and courts will go to private blockchain before public blockchain.
Well, if there is a blockchain in which there's a very large number of participants, let us say, that have, they might be permissioned, but a large number that have permission, how do you hold anyone accountable for whatever anti-competitive problems might arise in such a decentralized environment?
Yes, so tough question. Again, let me make my distinction between private permissioned and public and permissionless blockchain. As far as private blockchain are concerned, if you have a pilot, potentially you can make the point that the pilot could have actually directed the blockchain in a way that is legal, or at least the pilot has control over all of the transaction into the blockchain. And therefore, for that reason, you could say that the few people piloting the blockchain, the private one, could actually be held liable, right, for the practice. So this is for private blockchain, but here I think it will be very interesting, and of course it depends on each project, to see whether or not this is true, that the governance of the private blockchain has the exact same power as the governance of a firm. Because for a firm, it makes sense to say you will be liable for the practices of your employees because actually you had a way to stop those illegal behaviors from happening in the first place. Is that always true even for private blockchain? I'm not certain. So it will depend on cases, of course. But I think the analogy between private blockchain and the firm could be made potentially in a way that will work for antitrust. I think the story is much different for public permissionless blockchain because indeed there is no pilots. So who's governing the blockchain? Who's in charge of saying the blockchain should go that way and not that way? Is it true that a few participants can actually stop illegal transactions from happening in the blockchain? And there, I think that the analogy between the firm, at least in the way that we see the firm in antitrust, and the public blockchain is not working as it should. And so for that reason, I published a paper in which I argued that we should actually create a new legal fiction that will cover those participants in public permissionless blockchain that comes together to ensure the survival of the blockchain. And in a sense, if they do that, then they can actually kind of pilot the blockchain, although it won't be exactly like it is in the firm. The main difference between that, within the firm, there is vertical control being exercised, and in a public permissionless blockchain, there is no vertical control. It could be a form of horizontal control. And of course, again, we need to investigate, depending on each blockchain, who are those participants at the core of the actual public blockchain.
Are there analogies in existing competition cases involving associations, trade associations, or other more loosely organized bodies?
I guess it could work in a few cases, but the main difference between just taking that analogy, that legal fiction of the association of undertakings and the public blockchain, is that those participants in the public blockchain coming together, they don't have necessarily a economic activity on their own. So you cannot say it's actually a bunch of entities coming together so to create another kind of governance. And also it might be that you want to make a distinction between the actual practices at the individual level of each blockchain participants, and also all of them coming together, creating a practice which happens at the level of the entire blockchain, right? So you could say, for instance, let's modify the rules of our private public blockchain so that we'll actually compete better or destroy another public blockchain. And there you need to make a distinction between, again, the willingness of each participant and all of them coming together so to create something which could be seen as potentially an anti-competitive practice. So again, I think on some cases, yes, the analogy with the association could work, but not on all cases, because not all of them could actually be seen as a legal entity, especially when they combine their interests.
It does sound challenging to decide which parties can be held responsible. It's perhaps maybe a better analogy is in company law or securities regulation, asking, well, who is in the control group? What parties have in some way coordinated their interests so as to exert control and take a decision for the body?
Yes, precisely. And I think this is exactly what you want to do as far as the analysis goes for public blockchain. You want to analyze who are the participants who can actually control more or less the rest of the blockchain. And some of them, they have no interest in controlling the blockchain. If I want to buy your car tomorrow and pay in Bitcoin, you care and I care about the value of Bitcoin tomorrow, but in a year from now, who cares if you have actually sold your Bitcoin and cashed the Bitcoin into dollars? So we don't have an actual interest in the survival of that blockchain. If, however, we are holders of lots of tokens in that blockchain, or if we have a lot of smart contract going on, or if we have invested lots of money in that blockchain, then we want the actual blockchain to survive. And if we have such an interest, you see, if you study closely each blockchain, you will see a few participants coming together and trying to coordinate their behaviors on the blockchain so to incentivize others to go one way and not the other. So indeed, I think the issue of control is absolutely key in the sense of public blockchain, because again, this is not really vertical control, and this is something that we are not used to in the field of antitrust. So it will be challenging indeed.
I like the way you put it, as I recall in the article, which is to say, this thing is not like a human, and it's not like a firm. It's a new thing. And I can see that. So that's very helpful. What else should an antitrust lawyer know at this stage in the life of blockchain development?
What else? First of all, I would say, I guess, to keep in mind that indeed it is a technical topic, but at the end of the day, you will always see some practices that are familiar to you as a competition lawyer or specialist or competition agency. And so that is something you should keep in mind, not to be scared to enter the field, because indeed there are all of those fancy words, and we do the same as lawyers, right? We use all of those complicated words where we could say things in a more friendly manner sometimes. And the same is true for the blockchain world. You will see a fork, the hash, and all of those terms, but at the end of the day, it means something quite easy to understand. So it's more of an appeal in a sense to say, please enter the field because this is something important for now. And as far as where the entire field might go, I think something to keep in mind is that I guess you can make a point that at the end of the day, the objective of blockchain and the objective of antitrust is pretty much similar, in a sense that it is about challenging monopoly power. It is about having the market functioning in a way which is more decentralized. So the actual philosophy of blockchain and the implementation of that. And antitrust is actually pretty much similar. And I think it would be good if we could actually find a way to create a friendly dance between blockchain and antitrust, and not to oppose the two at the same time. And I'm sometimes afraid, if we look at that from the perspective of game theory, for instance, that if the legal minds always goes against blockchain communities, and blockchain communities always says, well, the law is boring, complicated, or it was something that I should not take into consideration because otherwise I can't do business. If we do that, we will actually enter into a confrontation. And I'm afraid that this is not the best way to actually play the game of decentralization and creating a better place. And there are ways for blockchain and legal minds to cooperate. So I guess, again, this is a call for everyone to invest in the field. Maybe if I can ask you my second question now. I'm curious to know whether or not you think that the first body to actually create some legal rulings in the field of blockchain antitrust will be courts, because actually you could say, you can make the point that yes, the courts, they could actually take on new matters and create legal ruling, especially in common law system. Or if you would say that, generally speaking, maybe not for blockchain, but generally speaking, you see that competition agencies are the one taking on new concepts and publishing guidelines. So who do you think we should expect as being the first to actually create something in the field? We do have a few court decisions, and in fact, I've done my research, and in the last decade, we had 320 cases in the US mentioning blockchain or discussing blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So we have a few decisions, but of course we don't have anything which is very strict for now. And so who should we keep on ours on, get a closer look at, in your opinion?
Well, actually, I would expect that it would come first from the national competition agencies around the world, and in the US from the Federal Trade Commission, because I say that rather than the Department of the Antitrust Division, because they have to go into court. But I would expect that the agencies around the world would be interested in tracking developments, just keeping an eye on what's happening, and at some point either bringing a case, or maybe more likely issuing some guidance that blockchain participants should be keeping in mind, so that by the time it gets to courts, there will have been some more experience that the courts can look to. Now, whether that's how things will emerge, of course, I don't know. Of the 320 cases that you saw, I wonder if any of them involved competition issues.
A few of them, actually. But it's just getting started. Obviously, it started with criminal activities. Now, civil matters, especially, you see a lot of cases involving contractual issues. Those are the main issues being discussed in courts right now. And you see a few cases are about unfair competition, so especially in California. But I guess you can make the point that indeed the FTC could, for instance, use the Section 5 for some of them, and the Sherman Act is being discussed, but that's really really nascent and really new. But indeed, it's something that also I try to keep in mind, which is that if you see the role for competition agencies to intervene when there is a market failure, well, potentially blockchain is something you want to consider, because it is actually creating privacy, it is actually creating new forms of competition on tech giants, for instance. So the general framework is very, very important. And yet sometimes I wonder if competition agencies, and some of them have been discussing that, but if they will be the first. So I was very curious to have your impression when you took on the Microsoft case, you actually set up the standard, right, for what digital antitrust will be at the time. And so sometimes I'm wondering if competition agencies are now waiting for a few brave judges to actually take on cases.
Well, actually, now that you've elaborated a bit, I'm going to alter my view, because the potential for private parties to bring cases, private plaintiffs raising competition issues, raising privacy issues, is something I wasn't thinking about before. And of course, because they have the incentives, they may have incentives to bring particular cases, and because they are creative and decentralized, many different people thinking about and looking at the phenomena, it may well be that we start with private actions and therefore in the courts. And that's, I think, quite a plausible scenario, at least as plausible as the alternative.
So yes, I guess for now, it's very, very important to understand what's going on in the field, and to have that framework in mind, and to keep those characteristics in mind. And of course, all we could do, especially as academic, is to wait. Hopefully we'll get cases as soon as possible, but indeed, I think we can actually get ready for those issues. And hopefully, of course, the less the better. And I wish that the technology will actually flourish in a way and help, to enhance market and trust in society. So hopefully that will be the case. So of course, we've been discussing a lot of the actual pitfalls and how you could use blockchain to create something which is very bad for the market. But the overall effect of blockchain, and this is something that I should mention probably, is that it is actually helping to create new transactions and to reinforce trust in existing business relationship. So of course, we know from the antitrust angle that trust could also mean that you are probably too confident that actually you could do something illegal and not being caught by the agency. But still, trust is good in terms of human relationship. And there are some forecasts from Gartner and the World Economic Forum saying, so of course it was before the crisis, so it remains to be seen, but that blockchain in 2025 will actually increase the number of transactions around the world by 6%, which is big and which is very positive. So this is something that I do want to mention, which is that the overall effect is positive. It could also help in reaching some of the goals that we are trying to reach in the field of antitrust, which means that when we will intervene and sanction some practices, and some should be, but we should keep that in mind, not to actually destroy the technology, which is a great ally in the battle.
Professor Schrepel, I can't thank you enough for spending this time with us and for sharing your insights that will, I think, guide us for quite a while until enough case law comes along to provide another source of insight. But it's been really very, very helpful. I think our viewers will be quite grateful. I will just briefly refer people who are interested to follow up to a couple of pieces that you've written. One is on Libra, a concentrated blockchain antitrust, it's called, and it appears in, my goodness, where does it appear? In the Michigan Law Review. Is that the online? No, it's volume 118 of the Michigan Law Review at 160. And that is, I think, 2020, a very recent piece. And another, The Theory of Granularity, which is a subtitle, The Path for Antitrust in Blockchain Ecosystems. Very interesting piece. And this one, where does this appear?
This one, for now, it's kind of a secret, let's say, but it is on SSRN. You could get it. And yes, I will announce in the coming weeks. But yes, but maybe if I may, because I know that the topic is seen as something very technical and maybe a bit geeky at times. So I had a lot of fun, not only writing those papers, but also creating videos and, trying to innovate in a few different formats. And so I started to publish a bit everywhere on the topic, just for fun. And so I decided recently to create a website where I'm gathering everything which is related to blockchain antitrust, and it's called blockchainantitrust.com. So potentially, if you are interested, of course, feel free to go there, and please send me emails to discuss the topic. It will feel good.
So it's as though it were one word, blockchainantitrust.com.
Blockchain Antitrust, oneworld.com.
Very good. Well, thank you once again. Really appreciate it. Goodbye.